Good morning, everyone. My name is Raina Ghazi, and I'm the Teacher Development Manager for Macmillan Education International Curriculum. With us today, we have literacy consultant Anna Hasper, who will be delivering this session today, focusing on vocabulary through reading. So in a moment, I will be passing it over to Anna. If you do have any questions, Anna will be engaging with you throughout the session. So if you do have any comments or feedback for any questions Anna has, then of course, please feel free to write them in the questions box that you will see on your side as well. So I will now leave it with Anna to take over the session. There will be Q&A towards the end of the session as well, if you do have any questions. Over to you, Anna.
Thank you, Raina. Just checking if you can hear me. I think I have to take that as a yes then. Great. Good. Welcome, everyone. Welcome. Good afternoon from me from Dubai. Maybe good morning for you in Odessa. Maybe good afternoon or good evening, wherever you are. Thank you so much for joining us at this Macmillan webinar. As Raina said before, can you just have a look at your control panel and see if you can find the questions box and type in where you are joining us from, so we can check actually if that questions box works, so we can actually interact together by typing questions and answers to my questions in that questions box. Can you please have a go? Where are you joining us from? Because that would be lovely to see. See some people from Russia. Great. Anyone else who has something to type? I was expecting to see it here. This is how it looks. Yeah. Good. So a lot of people from Russia, it looks like. So welcome. For you, it's probably still a little bit early, but thank you so much for joining us. I'm Anna, as Raina already said, and I'm a primary school teacher, but I also work for Macmillan as a literacy consultant. I think lots of you probably are also teaching young learners, maybe in a state school, maybe in a private school. So I really hope in this session that we can share our ideas and that you come away with some new ideas how to help your learners develop their vocabulary through reading. So, good. So what I want to do in this session, and I hope you want to join me, because I want to make it a little bit interactive through questions and getting your ideas as well. First of all, of course, as all primary school or even all teachers do, setting the context for our topic today, a little warmer to get your brain activated. And hopefully you can see how you can use this with your learners as well in the classroom. Then I want to look at the development of reading skills to reflect a little bit on how we actually went about learning to read. What was that journey like? And then we move on to making meaning from text, vocabulary, and practical activities at the end, but actually throughout the session, I'm trying to put some practical activities in there. And as you can see at the end, let's say 50 minutes for the webinar. We've got about 10 minutes for questions at the end. But also, if you have questions during the webinar, feel free to type them in that question box, and hopefully I see them and I can respond to that as well. So good. So let's get started and see how active you are, how ready your brain is. If not, hopefully I can wake it up, because I'm going to ask you to look at a grid full with letters. And your task is to have a look at the grid, see how many words you can make out of those different letters. You can only use the letters you see on the screen. You cannot add anything to it, but you can combine them in any way or form, in any direction. Any words you see, I would say, type it in the questions box, and then we can have a look at the end, how many words we were able to make. Are you ready? Steady. Here are your letters. Go. Oh, great. I already see some words. Keep going. Going to give you another 10 seconds. Some good creative thinking. That's loads, Tatiana. Lovely. Meadow. Gosh, wow. Good. Did anyone, I'm going to stop you there. Did anyone see this word? Words. Did anyone notice this word? Sound. Or maybe you saw this word, blending. Or maybe you noticed this word, meaning. And I don't know if anyone noticed there was one word that was interconnected all the way through. I don't know if anyone found that word, reading, which of course is the topic of our webinar, developing vocabulary through reading. Larissa, great, you picked up words, lovely. Now, as you can see, lots of different options possible, and I think this is a lovely activity because all your learners can work at their level. Larissa, you picked up designs, one of you picked up meadow, some of you picked up simpler words, maybe like sun. So it's a really nice idea for your students to just play with letters and work at the level they are at. But for me, of course, I had a bit of an aim with this activity to introduce all these important elementary or basic skills that are actually not so basic but very important for our readers. They need to be able to hear sounds, to blend that, to make it into a word, to link it to the meaning, and that actually is the basis of reading. And it's very simple for us avid and effective readers, but for our children when we are teaching this, maybe it is not so easy. So if you reflect on the skills you use to find these words, how did you go about it? What did you do? How did you come up with the word meadow? Can you type in the questions box how you got there? How did you find it? How did you get to this word? Leah, we don't have the video working because I'm talking to you from Dubai and the internet connection today hasn't been great. So you've got the slides and my voice. I'm very sorry about that. Yeah. Good. So making these words, indeed, you are actually combining the letters, putting them together with the sounds, and then in your brain you knew, based on your prior knowledge of the English language, this is a word and this is what I can write. Yeah? So as you can actually see, there's a lot involved. It's not just recognizing the letters, it's also linking it to what you already know. And I don't know what you are like. So connecting the letters, Natalia, definitely is a basic thing for us. But for many students, if they connect letters, they can make a word. It hasn't got any meaning because they might not know that word in English. So we need to go one step further than just teaching them to sound it out, to blend and segment, for example. They also need to learn about the meaning, which is what reading is all about. Because if you can make meaning of all these words, then hopefully you are going to be a little bit like me, a crazy reader. Anything I can read, I love to read, and for as long as I can remember, I have loved reading, and I bet many of you as well. I think a lot of teachers love reading stories, novels, picture books, and for us, over the years, we have developed this as maybe second nature. It seems so simple, and because it's so simple, it's also very enjoyable. But there may be also other reasons why reading is so enjoyable. It might relax you. It might teach you something new that you're interested in. It might bring you back to a different era. It might take you on a journey. Yeah? So I think for us readers, when you enjoy it, you're actually completely in the flow, fully engaged. But I think that we sometimes forget how difficult reading can be for our learners. So it might be a really good time for us as effective readers to go back to the moment that we started learning to read. How did we go about it? It was a long process, but we seem to forget because it's become sort of second nature. So my question for you is, if you can remember, because I found it really hard when I wrote this question to think about, when did I actually learn to read? I can't remember a lot about it, and I can't really give an age to this because I think I've completely forgotten. Maybe your memory is a bit better than mine. Can you think back? And maybe you remember vividly. When did you learn to read in your first language? How old are you? How old were you when that happened? In the classroom or with family? Yeah, you can go to the question box and type in your answers again. Oh, wow. Uli is of primary grades. Olga, 4 years old, Manukyan. 5. Fascinating. 6 or 7, Tatiana. Great. 7 years old, first age, Elena. It's very interesting, right? We've got quite a diverse range of ages. And if you look at research, actually, there is nothing that states one age is better than the other. It depends on a lot of different factors. I think, first of all, the child needs to be ready for it. And as you will notice, some children maybe are ready for it much younger than others. You could call it aptitude a little bit as well, but I think a lot of it has got to do with your socio-economic factors. Are there books available in your home? Do your parents value reading, or your grandparents? Stephanie, I don't really remember it either, so don't worry about it. But I think all these factors of having people around you, having access to picture books and storybooks, and maybe having someone around you who reads stories for you is really important. Then there is also another factor that we need to think of when we talk about learning to read. Cultural norms. What you will notice looking at, for example, education systems in Asia, children often start to read at the age of 3 or 4. They are extremely young. In KG, they start reading, and the parents at home work a lot on letter recognition. In Asia, of course, it's quite often characters, so there's a lot of extra work that goes into what the character looks like, what the sound is with it, and when you combine them. Whereas, for example, in Czech Republic, I think students start to learn to read at a later age. So it's often very much determined by your educational environment where you're in. So it doesn't really matter, there's no best age, but I think what we do need to remember as teachers, and sometimes forget, that reading really is a gradual process. And Olga, so your dad taught you, and maybe at school you read a little bit more, and yourself you had access to the encyclopedia. So it develops gradually, like throughout the years. It's an ongoing process. It often starts with listening. Then you start to speak and copy those words that you hear. And then you start to combine your knowledge of those symbols or letters or characters with the sounds in your head. And then you need to make meaning to those sounds at some stage as well. But the interesting thing is, once kids have learned to read, they're actually really engaged. A lot of children love it and get into it. And they don't even see it as effortful anymore. And this is, of course, the beauty where we want to get our children to, because I think us as adults as well, we love reading, because for us it's something that maybe relaxes us. We enjoy it. It's pleasant. It takes you away to different times. And once you have mastered that skill, it becomes sort of automatic. It actually sort of happens naturally, if you like it or not. And I think, I was going to say don't read this, but I'm pretty sure that most of you have already read this. Want it or not, you cannot stop yourself, which is very interesting. It's a fascinating process in your brain. You see it, you read it, even though I tell you, do not read this. Yeah. And here, that brings us to the next question. Do you think that reading actually is a natural process for us human beings? How do you feel about that? Can you write in your question box what you think? Is it natural or is it not such a natural process? I'll give you a minute to answer. Praskovia, thank you for being so keen and writing your answer in. Let's see what the others have got to say here. Probably it has become one, Anna. That's a really nice way of saying it. Not such a natural process, Natalia. Lovely. Great, thank you for being so active in that question box. That's always really nice, so I don't feel so lonely in my room here. We all feel connected now. I'm not sure, that's a really nice one as well. I mean, you can use theatre, yes. Good. Now, interestingly, and this always amazes me, and I don't know how you feel about it, once you've learned to read, you can't stop yourself. You see these letters jumping at you. In your head, you can hear the sounds and you understand you have the meaning. But to be honest, it's a really interesting thing that reading is not a natural process. When you go back to how we developed as human beings, listening and speaking, that is actually what our brain is hardwired for. Yeah, so in the past times, 4, 5, 10,000 years ago, people were speaking and listening. Tones, music, maybe even theatrical activities with their body. Their message came across through different means of communication. Reading and writing was sort of invented quite recently, if you can say, 4,000 or 5,000 years ago. And this also explains why we have different alphabets, because it's a man-made construct. So indeed, Tatjana, it is something that you acquire, not so naturally, but that we have developed the ability for to acquire more, because it's been happening for about 4,000 to 5,000 years. However, it's not an easy process and your brain is not hardwired for it. So those letters that we have in English are very different to the beautiful Cyrillic script you have in Russian or Hindi or Arabic. This needs to be taught explicitly to our children because they don't know what these symbols actually represent. So if you want to look and find out more about this, they say that reading and writing is called biologically secondary knowledge. It's something that actually was one of the main aims of schools. This was to teach our children how to read and write, because that became a very large part of communication in our modern society. The biologically primary skills, that is listening and speaking, and that you can actually pick up without going to a place of explicit instruction like a school. So fascinating. Reading is a process of, have a read, see if you can work this out. Don't need to type it in the chat box because it's really long, but I think you have been able to work this out again, because for us effective readers, who indeed we're born with sounds without the letters of Tatjana, for us we can sort of figure out and find the word boundaries based on the sounds and the letters that we put together. So reading is a process of relating those written symbols that we call letters to the oral language we already have in our brain. And that oral language that we've remembered are the words that have meaning for us, because otherwise we can't remember them. And this is how we make meaning from a piece of written text. So this is how we read. So it's very much intentional and it's very much active. You're actually, you could say, reading is thinking in that way. And what you see in a lot of schools, first language schools in Australia, the UK, Canada, New Zealand, and more also in non-native speaking countries, and maybe in your schools, is that we're teaching phonics. If you're not familiar with phonics, which I cannot imagine because I'm pretty sure you know lots about it already, phonics is actually one of the building blocks of reading. It means that your students start to link sounds to those symbols. So they start to sound out the symbols they can say. So there's a word like cat, they know k, at, those sounds, they put them together, they blend it, make it into the word cat, and hopefully they already know that word because we have to work with meaningful words, of course. They can find a picture of cat in their brain, they understand, and this is how their process of reading is actually initiated. So phonics is sort of the basics, it's actually cracking the code to reading, and you will see if you know a little bit more about it or if you do some research online that this is taught explicitly again to young learners in the English language classroom and also to first language speakers of English because we don't know those symbols. As you said before, Tatjana, we were born with the sounds, not with the letters. Indeed. Good. So I think there is more needed than just phonics for our students to start making meaning of that text. Phonics is the basis, but we need more to actually say we can read. So I want to move you away from that reading journey from how we started to maybe what we need to become effective readers. So again, feel free to reflect on your own experience as a reader and a language learner, because we are all language learners, be it in their first or in our second language, but also maybe reflect on your students in the classroom. If we talk about effective readers, what do you think they need to be able to do before we can say they really enjoy it, they're a little bit more like us effective readers and feel that enjoyment more so than seeing reading as a chore? So I'm going to give you a little gap fill, read the sentences and see if you can type some of the missing words in the chat box, or sorry, in the question box for me. Doesn't matter if you don't know all the words, have a go and see what you can complete for me. Here we go, effective readers, what do they do? Karina, yes, it will be recorded for your information. Great, Olga, well done. Oh, so lovely. Christine, it's so nice to see you all being so active and type in that chat box. Aha, good. I see shapes, I see sounds, I see words. Ah, connecting. Yes, you could definitely, Irina, use that word. Combine, Olga, that was the word I think I had in mind. Yes, Natalia, great. Good. So indeed, I think you have given me all the words here. So let's move back and check what we came up with. So effective readers is much more than that phonics. Yeah, I didn't even have to give you this because you were already going. So a little bit of scaffolding that we didn't need today. Good. Our prior knowledge, Irina, you got that as well. Linking, oh, prerequisite link. Lovely, good. I'm going to go through this. So indeed, you all said they need to recognize the shapes. Now, of course, we know that we call those shapes letters, but that's a random thing as well. For kids, it just seems like an S of snake or a T of a tower. So they recognize those shapes and they need to start linking those shapes with sounds. So this really is where your phonic teaching comes in, that they start to see a letter and they know which sounds, or maybe even a combination of letters and which sounds go with that. Then the next step is when we get them to when we introduce them to words like cat or mat or hat or green, that they need to be able to break up those letters into separate sound units. So indeed, you get the gr, e, n, r, o, g, frog. So they're breaking them up into the different sounds. Next step is combining those sounds together or connecting, as you said before, those sounds again. And then all of a sudden we've got the word frog. And hopefully in their prior knowledge, they can find back that that's a green jumping animal that makes funny sounds. It goes ribbit, ribbit. And you can find in the river or in the pond. So they also have to go back into their memory to actually find what that word meant. And with all the words we read, we have to also do that at a certain speed. I'm pretty sure that you are familiar with the word fluency of reading, because that is what the students need, because your brain is an amazing machine, but your working memory, your short-term memory, isn't that long. It's maybe about 20 seconds that we remember all these words. So if students at a certain stage work with longer sentences and are very slow in recognizing the sounds that go with the shapes and combining those sounds into a word, find the meaning in prior knowledge and then go to the next word, it means that they don't really get to the end of the sentence knowing what they're reading, because your brain has already forgotten that. Yeah. Does it mean that a person, very good question, Olga, does it mean that a person who knows the meaning of a word but lacks pronunciation won't be able to read? The meaning of a word, if you look at how our brain functions, and this is in English, which doesn't have a one-to-one sound relationship, Olga, so maybe it's different for Russian or Ukrainian or Slavic languages or French, but speaking about English, if you don't know how to sound out the letters and combine them, you cannot make the word, and that word is stored in your brain on a sound base, because the spelling of English, as you know, there's so many different ways of spelling the same sound, but there's also the same spelling with so many different sounds. So for us with English, where you don't have a one-to-one relation between the letter and the sound, it's very difficult to understand what you read. So again, Olga, I think it really depends on your definition of reading. And in my class, I've got learners who can read out words, because I can read Spanish very well, because the letters are very similar to maybe English, but I don't understand it. So if your definition about reading is to comprehend it, I would say yes. If your definition of reading is to sound it out, to decode, they can still maybe do that. But if you don't know the pronunciation, it's very difficult to say it correctly. But finding the meaning means that you need to know the sounds, because your brain has stored it predominantly in sounds in English. Great question. Good. So I'm going back to the prior knowledge that we spoke about, because indeed this actually links to your question, Olga, that we go back with the sound of the word we've made in our heads. We go back in our head and try to find what it means. So that prior knowledge is super important if you want to make meaning. And I don't know, I'm going to challenge you to think about a language that you have learned in the past. It could be English, it could be something else. Tell me some things that you learned very early on when you learned that language. What sort of things did you learn very early on in the learning process there? Can you type it into the question box for me? Stefania, that sounds lovely, to put theatre into breaking up words into sounds, and having fun with it is so important. Great. So when you teach words, simple words, Christine, sounds, words, yeah, it's often words. Sometimes it's chunks, but it's often indeed simple words, as you say there as well, that you can maybe even act with, as you just mentioned, or create sounds with. You can even maybe create sentences with words in a mechanical way. Yeah, indeed. But again, your bases seem to be words, grouping words with the same sound, Grace. Great. This is really interesting because every time I ask the questions to teachers, what's more important, grammar or vocabulary, a lot of teachers and even a lot of parents will say, my daughter, my son really needs to learn the grammar. Learning a language is about mastering the grammar. But then when I ask teachers or parents, think back to the time that you were learning a language. What did you learn first? Yeah, it wasn't the grammar, it was actually the vocabulary. Basic, simple words, whereas many think that grammar is more important. Vocabulary, and I don't need to tell you this really because I'm sure you already know this, it carries a much greater amount of information. And you all said we learned words, simple words, chunks, maybe some expressions. It was all about getting your message across. Now, interestingly, of course, you can never really separate grammar and vocabulary completely, because if you want to communicate effectively and accurately, particularly when kids grow a little bit older, when we want them to use those sentences, they're very much interrelated and you need both to communicate effectively. But vocabulary is really the core of your message. Have a read. I love this quote from Rupi Loco and Nichols. Yes, and indeed Olga brings up that looks like the lexical approach. I think looking at teaching, this really has changed. If you look at textbooks, even student books for children in the past, it was really very much focused on grammar, whereas now we focus more on the vocabulary and the grammar that goes around it. Yeah, so vocabulary is really what makes meaning and makes that meaning or comprehension accessible, particularly when you read. If they don't know the meaning of a content word, it's really hard to enjoy that story. Because for kids, it's all about the meaning first. That's what they look at. Is it fun? Is the story cool? Can I relate to the story? So that vocabulary is really key. And when you relate this back to our first language learning process, the first words children learn are actually individual lexical items. Initially, you come up with words like mum, mama, papa, daddy, maybe no, maybe yes, maybe doll, maybe car. Basic, simple words, and that's what we build our vocabulary on, and that's when we start at a later stage to combine that indeed with the grammar. Zana, I don't know why you can't see the chat box, but I'm trying to read out the answers if there's anything I integrate, so you are aware what's in the chat box. Thank you for mentioning that. Good, so I think I don't know how you feel about that, but vocabulary is oh so important. It really matters, because what is the use if my students can actually see the symbol, link it to a sound, combine the sounds together, and then have a word they cannot find in their brain because they don't really know the meaning of that word. It's not going to help them to enjoy my stories and my readers more in the classroom. And also, if you look at studies, effective readers often have very good vocabulary. One of the problems often is, though, that we focus a lot on reading, but not all those course books focus so much on building that vocabulary. And it's so important, because if we do things in class and the students can decode and they're quite fluent, but they don't know what that word means, I'm really wondering how much they're going to enjoy this reading journey that we take them on. It limits their enjoyment, as you can see in this picture. It could even frustrate them. And it can even reduce their love for English, or it can reduce their love for reading. And in the worst case, and this is really in our role as young learner teachers, it can even reduce their love for learning. And this is so detrimental, because for learning, when they go beyond their grade 3 or 4, they need to read, to learn about life or science or mathematics. So the danger really is if we don't spend enough time on developing vocabulary with our learners, that our learners become frustrated, lose maybe the will to learn, but also their self-esteem. And if they don't have enough words, really, it's very hard to communicate. So as you can see from this quote, vocabulary, words, chunks, indeed, they are really a sort of gatekeeper for students to build up, not even for students, for all people, to build relations with other people, to communicate, to listen to someone, to speak, to express yourself. Without words, we are actually nothing. So if we don't spend enough time on building this, we can actually lock off a huge part of our students' future. We keep the door closed to success. That's often how I try to say it to my teachers and students. Because if you don't know the words, for example, in your school, there might be science and maths in English. If they don't know that word, they cannot do the math equation. They cannot understand the science because they don't really know what it says. So it's really key. If we want to enable our learners and give them an opportunity to have a very successful future, it's really key that we build vocabulary because it impacts all aspects of life for our students. So one of the big things, particularly in reading lessons, I would say, integrate that building of vocabulary, focus on building that up in your classroom. And I just try to sort of marinate my students actively with all words around them. They're on the wall. We've got a word tree. We look at different readers. We get them to work with the language. We explicitly talk about new words so they can learn the words, they can see and hear them, and then they can use them in their speaking or their writing afterwards. Exposure there. And like Grace said, in context, yes, but maybe even before we read, I'll try to look at those words with my students, which they then see in a context later on in the story. Yes, so one way of building that vocabulary with your learners definitely is through having a reading program in your classroom. Now, I don't know if you use picture books or storybooks, or maybe you already use a reading program. This is one from Macmillan, Talk About Text. It's a lovely reading program. It's got about 23 or 30 different levels, all sorts of different genres, fiction, non-fiction, with some beautiful pictures in there as well. And then we need to think, of course, how are we going to go about integrating that vocabulary more into our lessons? Yeah. Now, I think one thing, if we speak about teaching vocabulary and anything to young learners, and this goes back to your comment, Grace, that we learn vocabulary in context, it's really important. But I think we also need to keep in mind that there's been a lot of research about teaching vocabulary implicitly or being very explicit about the teaching of vocabulary, so direct teaching of vocabulary. And this is a very nice quote from Trelease, who did a lot of research on that as well. So he says we need to focus learners' attention deliberately on new words. They need to notice those words. They need to see those words. Whereas most of the things when we teach young learners, we have it in songs, we have it in a poem. It's very much learned holistically and indirectly, which is a very valid way of teaching it. However, there are certain words that are so important that maybe need more attention, because if you give more attention, you're actually enabling that deeper learning because your brain is focused on it. Yeah, so noticing is the first stage of teaching vocabulary. And I'm pretty sure that if you've done CELTA or WILE extension, you're familiar with the 3 stages of reading, so that vocabulary fits in those 3 stages as well. In your first stage, and this is actually going to talk about text, you see that there's a lot of focus on highlighting the most important words. So there's activities that students can notice and see those new words. And then we talk about the meaning, which is what you can call elaborate. The second stage of the reading program could be, okay, let's go and find these words indeed, as Grace said, in the context. So they see how it's being used in real life. And then, of course, after the reading, we're not finished. The story might be over, but we really want to go back and revisit those words we've learned and give students an opportunity to play with those new words that we've just looked at. Yeah, so it's notice it, then they get to encounter it in the text, and then we want them to use it maybe in speaking or in writing. So you're really marinating them with these words. It's consolidation all over. Yeah. But then the question, of course, for us teachers is, which words do you want to pre-teach? And I think that's always a very difficult one. And there's a huge debate in teaching in the first place about should we pre-teach or should we not? I think when your aim is vocabulary development and not so much reading, speed reading or reading for general idea, I think if your aim is to develop vocabulary, you really need to explicitly focus on those words, because we want to develop that language and we want to enable them to enjoy the story that we're going to give to them later. Yeah, so if you actually neglect that pre-teaching, they don't understand anything, you might get you frustrated and demotivated learners back, which is not what we want. Yeah? Now, which words are you going to teach? The key words, of course, for your story. Which words are essential? Now, we often get questions from how many words would that be then? Really hard to say. I think it really depends on the words in the story. And Evgenia, indeed, you select the words that you think your students are not familiar with. So indeed, looking at the story, it's important that you relate it back to your students' current knowledge. What do they already know? If they know these words, you don't need to pre-teach. However, if they don't know, and it's an important word, we need to pre-teach that word. I normally think it's about 6 or 7 is probably the max your brain can work with. If there's more, you might want to pre-teach the words for the pages you're reading today, and then revise them and pre-teach the words for the page you're reading next week. So don't overload them with vocabulary, but select the words that they are not familiar with and that can block them from understanding the story, because that really demotivates them again. What you can see again in this Talk About Text series, all these words are highlighted there for you. The before reading, prior knowledge, how you can do that, the vocabulary for reading that they've selected there. Now, like I said, this is quite a lot of words here, and you might think we don't need all of these words for the coming lesson. Select the ones that you do need. And then again, they also look at high frequency words that are very hard to decode maybe for your students, so they just need to recognize when they see them, your sight words. So it's very well shown to us teachers in this series. And they highlight rich tier 2 vocabulary, and that's what I want to take you to as well. When you pre-teach, there's different tiers of vocabulary available for your students. Again, if you're not familiar with this, copy the name and do some research afterwards. It's really interesting. Tier 1 words is the words that a lot of our students already know, basic words, quite concrete: cat, cake, snake, all the words we sort of use in daily listening and speaking in the classroom. And we build from by showing them to the students, the flashcards or touching them. Then your tier 3 language is very domain specific. It's more technical words for a specific terminology for an area of medicine or science. These words we don't really teach, and we don't really need for IELTS either. And if we do encounter them, we encounter them in the context, and then we might teach them. However, the tier 2 words, those are the words that our students maybe don't have a lot of exposure to. They're not in our daily course books quite often. They don't hear them so much in listening and speaking. They are words that we use for writing and reading more than anything. Yeah. So, for example, a tier 2, one word would be, oh, I go to Saudi Arabia tomorrow. Well, a tier 2 would be something like, I travel to Saudi Arabia tomorrow. So you see, it's very much the same meaning, but we often say go to, find, make, do. There's very vague verbs, whereas in writing, we are a lot more specific in our word choice. Yeah. So I live in a flat, I live in an apartment, I chuck it in the bin, I have some litter. And the word litter would be more academic. So those words, they're trying to develop in readers quite a lot as well, because they do need to know them when they want to start writing. Olga, you've got another question. Well, if they're not very commonly used words, I think you need to think, do my students need them? Are they relevant for my learners? And maybe we don't need them for this stage of the story. We can introduce them after the story and be selective, because we really want students to build words that are going to be useful for their future. So not very commonly used words. I think you want to think, are they not very commonly used in speaking? Are they words that they might need in grade 3 or 4 for writing? Because maybe these words are more formal and academic. Is that word to introduce when I do something like a matching activity at a later stage? For the story enjoyment, I wouldn't directly go there, but maybe collect them and see how you can integrate it later, linking back to that story and saying, oh, but this is the way that we would write about it. Yeah, so it's really a difference between your tier 1 listening and speaking words and your tier 2 writing and reading words. Good. So moving on from the words, I think this is, again, like you already said, a really important message for us. What do they already know? If they already know it, move on. If they don't know it, yeah, building on synonyms, indeed. That's a really nice one with your tier 1 and your tier 2. Yeah. Learning, Tatiana, very nice question. Do I use L1? I try to avoid it as much as I can, because I think they need as much exposure to English as I can give them. And I try them to sort of activate all the language they have at their disposal. So I use a lot of visuals. Let me show you one activity I use to introduce a little bit more of an abstract concept. Are you ready to guess with me? And then I go back to why you maybe don't need to use L1. It's a last resort, I would use it. So I'm going to ask you to guess and use your chat box. I've got a picture card here for you. And you can make this on PowerPoint very easily. If you don't have it, cut a hole in a bit of paper, move it around. And I get my students to look at the screen very carefully and say, okay, let's have a look then. Oh, we're going to talk about animals. You can see a little feet, can't you? Do you think we're inside or we're outside with these animals today? Oh, do you know what they can see? They might say inside, they might say outside. Okay, let's have a look further then. What else? Oh, green grass. So maybe we are outside. What color can you see? And I know they have the words color. Evgenia, you're going a step ahead. My next question indeed would be, what animal do you think it is? And they might say that in their first language, that it's a squirrel. I'm not sure it's a squirrel. And then my students guess again, and they might say in their first language the word bear, which is completely fine. Elena, well done. It's completely fine when they say that. And I would say, well, in English we say it's a bear. So when you use a visual, we don't, of course, need that first language. Yeah. Now we still have the problem. I've introduced my reader now to my students. Okay, so we're going to read the story Winter Deep Sleep. But winter is quite an abstract thing for younger learners. And it's not that I can say months, because they don't always understand the months either. So I'm going to take it further. So the word winter, we're going to explore that. Yeah. So good. So have a look here at my 2 hula hoops. I put them on the floor in my classroom, and I gave all my students a picture card with clothes. Now, I think that you know what I want you to do. So you would be my students, you would have your picture card, and then I would say, can you put them in 2 different groups? You decide. And here they might go back, Olga, to their first language, they discuss, they talk, not a problem at all, because when they're done, we get back together, and I've asked them, okay, put them in the right circle. Why have you put them in these circles? Here we go back to English, and then I might say, okay, warm clothes, cold clothes. So here we can actually start to introduce the concept in a much more tangible, abstract way for our students, that summer, you wear your hot clothes, winter, you wear your cold clothes. So we're going to read about a sleep in winter, when we are wearing our cold clothes. So here you're really setting the context in a very much more child-friendly way, and very much multisensory, right? They've got pictures, they've got the cards, they're moving around, and then hopefully we have clarified that concept of what we're going to read about. I don't think we need a lot of first language here for our students. The reason why I try to avoid it and do it in a different way that's more child-friendly is because I want them to engage heavily in what I do. I want them to be involved. Because again, you see the candy floss, the sticky thing on the right? If something is engaging and your brain enjoys it, it's much easier to remember this information. If there is one student, to go back to your question, Olga, do we use L1? If there is one student who still doesn't understand the concept of winter, but my other kids get it, I might say, okay, quickly, what's the word in Russian? What's the word in Arabic? Yeah, and there's one student that you know has got a good level, so you can check, because I don't speak Russian. But then if that word is out there, it's used effectively. But ideally, I use visuals, realia, body language, theatre, effective, child-appropriate ways that engage them in the learning process. This is another fabulous activity. Now, we don't have time to do it. Elena, what about throwing snow to them? I live in the Middle East. It's a little bit hard to find snow, but if you have that opportunity, yes, and you can find YouTube and show them snow as well. But for my students who have grown up here and never traveled, it's really hard to understand in that way snow. We do have cold weather when they wear their jumpers and trousers, which is about 21 degrees in January. So snow, I would love to. If you can, yes, go and get it. Another activity to get my students engaged in the story would be listen and draw. So I've got the title and the front cover of a book here, and I just dictate to my students in very simple sentences. They sit at their desk, they have their colored pencils ready, and I would say, okay, there's a girl. They draw a girl in front of the stairs. This is language that they're familiar with, right? At the top of the stairs is a door. They know stairs, they know in front of, they know girl. Ooh, the girl's got long black hair. She's wearing a skirt and a shirt. So while I dictate this very slowly, they draw. They listen to the words, they draw it in their picture, they draw a little backpack maybe that you can see, and then they draw a little picture in the girl's hands, and then they draw what they can see on that picture. Yeah? So here you are using some of the bigger words as well, picture, but they know that already. So here I'm just recycling words, and I want to get them to 3 new words I'm going to teach next in the story. Yeah, so based on this, they have drawn. I'm going to now show my front cover of the book. Well, they're all looking at their pictures. They've compared together. We maybe talked about some words they're not sure about. And then, okay, have a look. Does your picture look similar to mine? What do you notice about the girl? So we can actually then start going from the personal start of the story to my front page, to looking at the title. What do you notice about the girl? Can you see anything about her hair? Can you see anything about her eyes? Who do you think this person is? Maybe Malin? Malin, is that an Arabic name? Is there a Russian name? No, maybe different country. Yeah, and then you could introduce, if they know a little bit about it, and my class does, because we're talking about the Rugby Cup in Japan, maybe they would say Malin is a Japanese name. Okay, so we have a context set which I can now use in an active way to start looking at the meaning of the new words and introduce those words. I need to notice them. So let's open the book, and slowly I'm going to go through the pictures. Look, it's not about China. Maybe Malin is from China, not Japan. So there's one girl, maybe one's from Australia, maybe one's from China. Yeah. Oh, and look, this must be Australia. Where are they? What are they doing? Yeah, this is Jasmine, the character of the book we're going to read about. And Jasmine has a friend who does not live in Australia. This is Malin. Have a look at the building. Where do you think she lives? Then hopefully there comes a word like house. Was not really a house, maybe flat. Okay, but we often say, or flat, but we write often apartment. Yeah, so here you get that big word coming out, apartment. Okay, so maybe they're going to travel to that place. Oh, look, they are now in China eating. So maybe this story is about going to China, a different way of going to. You take the plane, we can introduce to travel to, and if you want, bring out your map and talk about China, because China has a very big city, the most important city in China, related back to the most important city in Russia or Ukraine or Dubai, the UAE, which is Dubai. In China, the capital, the most important city is Beijing. So in a way, starting very personalized, moving on from the cover to do a picture walk, only looking at the story in the book, means that you're actually really highlighting that meaning is so important. They've got a few key words they need: apartment, travel, capital. Yeah, and then we could go to the story and make sure that they see it in the story. So it's actually a nice flow. They notice the words. We talk about the meaning, they can hear me say it, they might repeat it after me drilling, and then we write it down on our word tree or on the whiteboard, or maybe even in their own notebooks. Then we go back and read the story, because indeed, Olga, as you said before, they need to see it in context. Yeah, we're going to look at these words. What was that again, that building she was living in? Apartment. Can you find it on the page? What was that big city that we have in all countries, the most important city, capital city? Point at it on the page. So here we get those words back, and we can ask questions about it. Questions to recall, what does it mean again? And questions to personalize, what's the capital city of our country then? Yeah. Oh, apartment, here we go. Can you find an apartment? What's another word for apartment we talked about? Can you point at it? And do you live in an apartment? So here you're actually, again, revisiting the words, but indeed in the context of how this big brain word has been used. You refocus their attention, so you're actually integrating vocabulary in all stages. The pre-reading, during the reading, we explicitly focus on it through questions. There's a bit of speaking about it. They have their questions to do with their buddy. And then I might ask after this page to turn and talk to the person next to you. What did you learn from this page? Hopefully they're going to say something again about the apartment. Or maybe they're going to say something about capital city. Again, they're recycling that language with their elbow buddy. Very controlled, but a great way of doing it. Yeah, and speaking, using that language that you teach in spoken form is so important. because the way we find these new words back, remember, this is because we've stored them the way we say. So you can only remember a word if you know how to say it. Otherwise, you can't even store it properly because you can't find it back very easily because your brain stores that language and what it sounds like. And then, of course, we have your next stage where we need to make sure that they meet that language again. Now, there's lots of fun activities. I don't have time for a lot of them, but I definitely want to do this one with you. So I would give my students a mini whiteboard or an A4 where they just scribble the words on if they can write very quickly. If they can't write yet, they shout out the words. So I might dictate the sentence to them. Sorry, I'm just trying to find where it is. I might dictate the sentence to them, and then I say, Jasmine is going to China. What's the beep word? And my students might write it down. They might shout it out, whatever level they're on. I'm now working with a class that can spell those words, yeah? And they write it on the mini whiteboard, show me, right, good, next one. Next question or sentence, Maiden lives in a big city. It's the beep of China. They write it down very quickly and they show me. So you're actually, in a fun way, making sure that your students see those words again. And that is so important, that your students get an opportunity to see those words again, because the more often they see those new words, the more likely they remember them. Paul Nation, I'm pretty sure you've heard of him. He makes a very important statement, and I think in New Zealand, in our school system, we really try to work with that. If you have 45 minutes of English a week, it's better to do 3 times of 15 minutes on your work, your words, your reading, whatever, than 1 slot of 45, because you can recycle those words in a very spaced manner over your 45 minutes that you've got, and that really helps your students remember things better. Yeah, so a beep dictation might be a nice warm-up for the next day when your words come back. Another way, if you want to integrate some grammar, this is also a really nice activity. You can adapt it to any book. Can you make a sentence based on what we just read? Jasmine was the girl in the story. What was she going to do? So here your students need to recognize a lot of high frequency sight words very quickly and think about what they read. Jasmine is, any ideas? If you have a sentence for me, feel free to type it in the chat box. Jasmine is, what's she doing? Where's she going? Where did she go? Is playing, right? She was on the beach, she was playing, yeah. And do you remember she was going to go? What's that big word, that big brain word? We don't say going to go, we say she's going to China. Well, yeah, she's going to travel to China. So this way, again, you're actually working at different levels with your students, but as you can see, I've tried to insert my big brain words, traveling, capital, and apartment. Very good question. Is apartment British English or is flat British English? I think flat is more what we say, although in New Zealand we use both words. So nice question there. So here students can make sentences. She's going to China. Jasmine usually goes to the beach, goes, why have we got Jasmine likes playing, Jasmine is going to China. I can't see half of my screen, sorry. So there is another one in the capital, lives in an apartment, I think, at the right. So here you integrate actually that grammar, which for some exams is really important. But my favorite 2 activities I'm going to talk you through is look, imagine and tell, and look, imagine and write. So we go back to the cover of the book after we've read the story, maybe on day 3 or 4. We know the story is about 2 lovely girls, and we say, okay, what do you know about the girls? Tell me. Okay, things we don't know. How old do you think they are? Yeah. What do you think they like to eat? What do you think they like to do in the weekends? What do you think they did together in China? So here we can really talk about how do you think they felt being together in China, and they can make a little story about that. They can either tell it turn and tell to their elbow buddy, but also we can predict and we can write about it. Yeah, so imagine the picture Jasmine was holding in her hand is now after the travel. Where did they go? What did they see? What did they eat? How did they feel? Can you write in your diary, imagining you're Malin or Jasmine? And here, of course, they need to be able to write, but if they're at that level, again, you're personalizing the story, and hopefully you create the opportunities to bring back that useful language, that the big brain words, your tier 2 vocabulary that we've looked at. Now, why is this also important? Vocabulary, tier 2 vocabulary, or the big brain words as I call them. And why is it so important that we look at it before, while and after the reading? Because to be honest, vocabulary is really what propels your students upwards and forwards in learning. They need to have that language available to read stories and also to make stories, to communicate. The making sentence, Olga, you can do it orally. You can cut it up and get them to order them and stick them on paper, or you can get them to copy and write. So there is lots of different ways to play with that language, but they need it to move forward in their life. So if you do reading in your lessons, and I'm sure you do, ensure you focus on vocabulary. Find out where they are so you can teach what they need. Involve your students in the process. Give them some personal twist to it by making the sentences that they like, by maybe making a story afterwards, or by predicting and drawing themselves what they think it looks like. Very important with your new words is that you move from them seeing them and hearing them to, at the end stage, getting them to use them. Give variety in your activities, make them short, and most of all, revisit, recycle, recycle, recycle in various age-appropriate, fun ways, and enjoy the process. Because when you have fun reading and you model that, I think it's quite contagious. So hopefully they also end up having fun in the reading process. Good. I see that we've gone over time a bit, so I'm going to stop here. If you have any more questions, type them in the chat box. If you have any questions afterwards, feel free to get back to us and send them to us. I hope that you have a few ideas that you can take away and activities that you can take away, particularly for your students, and that you have come to realize as well how important our role is as teachers of reading in developing that vocabulary. And remember, vocabulary has a lot of power, so choose your words wisely and you'll help your students do well. Thank you so much for joining us and for being so active on the question box. And any questions, let me know. I'm here. And if you have anything later, let us know as well. Just want to say thank you for your active participation.
Just to say thank you so much, Anna, for the amazing webinar. I think the teachers seem to be really engaged, which is really, really useful. I just wanted to mention something. Anna created a booklet for us, a literacy booklet called Vocabulary, Developing Vocabulary Through Reading, focusing on our Talk About Text series. And we've actually now have that as a PDF format. So if you would like access to that, please feel free to email. I think there's an email address on the next slide, maybe, Anna. It's the International Macmillan email address here, international.curriculum@macmillaneducation.com. So feel free to email us, because it's really worthwhile sort of going through Anna's webinar, and also some of the key context of that she has mentioned within the literacy booklet, which is great as well. So feel free to kind of get in contact. But if you do have any questions, we do have a few minutes. So, and I don't know if there's any questions that might have come up.
I don't know if you can still hear me. I see a lot of thank you, which is really, really nice. I just want to say thank you to everyone as well. Grace had a question. Should we be working on pronunciation when working on reading? I find my students struggle with this task. I think, Grace, when you introduce new words, it's really important that they get to hear you say those words. And maybe you want to show the stress when you beat your hands, or you stamp your feet, or you clap your hands, or with an elastic band, and get them to repeat those key words that you want them to say correctly after you. And it's drilling, right? But you can make it a lot of fun by saying, okay, say it like a tiger. Words could be apartment, say it like a tiger, apartment. Say it like a baby, apartment. Say it like you're happy, apartment. So that way you get them to work on a few of those keywords every time. Of course, another way, and I think Talk About Text offers that too, is they can do shadow reading. You get the reader on an iPad, students can actually play it and read along, because pronunciation is very important. But you need to decide when are you going to work on this. I would say in your pre-teaching, definitely, and your post-teaching might give an opportunity when they speak to correct. But to develop reading comprehension, reading aloud is not the most important thing. So yes, find a time and place in your lesson to work with that, because it is important that they can say it, because if they can't say it correctly, it's very hard to remember the word correctly. Another question, Raina, if we have time left.
Sure.
How many vocabulary units do students acquire within a week of studies? Oh, Zana, that is such a difficult question, because I don't know how often you see your students, how many hours. I think if you look at 7 words a day, and not just at the words, because we're not only translating to L1, we're also looking at what does it mean, what does it sound like, what does it look like when we write it. I think if you have 7 words a day, that is plenty, because the other thing is you don't remember the word directly. You need to revisit it in games and activities. So anything more than that, I think it's going to be quite hard for your brain to deal with. So keep it like that. For each story you read, maybe look about 5-6 words. And my story could be a whole lesson, could be 40 minutes when we read and do things with the words and activities. So hard to give you an exact number, but don't overload. Not sure how helpful that is. Do we get a certificate, Lilia's asking. Raina, do you have an answer to that?
We do. If you just email on the email address here, then we will be able to send it through by next week. Also, the session will be recorded, so if you do want to refer back to the great content that Anna's just delivered, it will be on our Macmillan Education International Curriculum YouTube page. So if you just type that into YouTube, you will find access to this hopefully by next week. So if there are not any more questions, I think we will end the webinar there. Thank you so much, Anna, for a great webinar, really engaging, really useful. Hopefully our teachers have found it really useful as well. And thank you to the teachers as well who have taken the time to come and join our session. We do have a second webinar with Anna in November, on the 28th of November, with the same timings, and we will be sending out invites to those as well in the coming weeks. So please feel free to join and also pass along to other teachers who you think would be interested in joining as well. Great, so we'll leave it there. Thank you again, and hopefully you'll be able to see Anna in a couple of weeks again with another webinar.
Thank you everyone for joining, and thanks Raina for making this possible.
No problem at all. Thank you guys, take care. Bye.
Bye.